Wednesday edition of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. What's going on in corporate America? Disney decided to put Jimmy Kimmel back on the air. Have they not heard the people who voted for Trump? We'll discuss that coming up on Clay and Buck Plus.
Plus, Jim Jordan's scheduled to join us to talk about YouTube admitting, guess what? They did censor so many of us who were speaking out against COVID. We'll break that down for you, too.
10 to 1 on News Talk KVNU, 102 FM and 610 AM.
Absolutely wild story today. I don't even know what to make of some headlines anymore. Ryan Ruth, the would-be Trump assassin. This is the man who, a 59-year-old man accused, convicted. He was found guilty by the jury today in I think what was about a 3-week-long trial. But he was accused of, and again today found guilty by a jury of attempting to kill Donald Trump at a golf course as the then candidate, former president candidate, but then of course future president, as he was playing a round of golf on his own Florida golf course last year. This was the second attempt on Trump's life during his second campaign. And Ruth today, 59-year-old man accused, was found guilty by a jury on all charges, some serious charges. And for those not familiar with this one was just so weird. The man he was a Democrat way back in the 90s, but he was a outspoken Republican in his for the last few decades. He was a huge fan of Vivek Ramaswamy, a one-time presidential candidate, now a person who's running for Senate as a Republican in the Midwest, and then it appeared. I mean, of course, we don't know. It appears this came down to Ukraine, at least in what was presented to the jury on Ruth's possible motivation for this. That he didn't like where Trump was at on Ukraine, more friendly towards Russia, things like that we know from news reports, and so but the prosecution and the defense in this trial didn't really dig into that so much. They stuck with the specifics of what happened anyway. Ruth was found guilty on all charges. And after the verdict was announced by the court bailiff reading the jury's verdict, Ruth tried to take his own life in court. He grabbed a pen after the verdict was read and attempted to stab himself several times in the neck. Authorities stopped him. And a sketch artist actually caught the moment. Of course, no photography allowed in court. And described the scene later to journalists, said that he showed no emotion. His face didn't change. He just grabbed the pen off the table and tried to take his own life, stabbing himself in the neck. His daughter in the courtroom yelled from behind, "Oh my God, he's trying to kill himself. He's trying to kill himself. Someone please stop him." And an IT specialist who witnessed this said the defendant was tackled by marshals and dragged out of the courtroom side entrance. And then there was a pause when they brought him back into court. He didn't appear to have a wound. They said that he saw no blood. And his daughter yelled, "I love you, please don't do this, we'll get you out." Ruth, a very troubled man. He waited, I believe, 10 hours in the bushes of the golf course. And U.S. attorneys rested their case last Friday after calling 38 witnesses. Ruth defended himself in court and called 3 witnesses, personal friends, who all admitted to the jury they hadn't actually known him well or spoken to him much in years. And cell phone records showed that Ruth had several burner phones, and there was a history of calls and texts where he first tried to pay someone $150,000 to do this, and then decided to plan it himself. And the prosecutors presented a case against him in which it was very clear this was, at one point during the trial, prosecutor said this was not a publicity stunt. This was something that was planned for months, and he even had an escape plan. He had a kind of a non-direct route to the Miami airport and arrangements for flights to Mexico. And text messages show that before he left the house that day to go hide in the shrubs along the edge of the golf course for 10 hours, he said that he texted a friend, an old friend, and said, the text just said, "I may see you Monday, I may not." And prosecutors also show that he intended to be wounded. He'd done research on nearby hospitals and what stories to come up with for a potential gunshot wound. Remember, as a former president, even though he was only a candidate at the time, as a former president, Trump did have Secret Service protection still. And so Ruth apparently had made plans for the event of him being shot himself after assassinating the president. This whole story up to Ruth trying to stab himself with a pen today, just absolutely bizarre. September 15th, 2024, less than an hour before authorities say Ruth was about to open fire on Trump, he was sending texts to his children. He had 3 children. I'd sent them texts saying to his daughter and 2 sons, telling them that he loved them and that they were brilliant and they had a bright life ahead of them. And there was an eyewitness to the shooting. He told a jury that he saw, described him as frantic and disheveled man leaving the scene after a shot rang out, and decided to follow him. And he actually took pictures of a black Nissan Xterra and wrote down the license plate. That's how they first were able to track Ruth down. So jury announced today again guilty on all counts. And this, by the way, the defense that they mounted, they didn't have a lot to go on, honestly. And Ruth's defense that he presented for himself, he called 3 witnesses again, 2 former friends, and a former Marine sniper, Michael McClay, who told the jury that the SKS rifle authorities found at the scene jammed twice after firing only 1 shot, and the prosecutors, they disputed the weapon's capability. Basically, the defense they were mounting is, look, he was never actually going to hurt anyone with this weapon, and he didn't really plan to. The jury didn't buy that, obviously, with the extensive planning he put in. He obviously intended to hurt someone, and in this case, the former president. And that was his entire defense. But after her father rested his own case, Ruth's daughter, Sarah, spoke with CNN and said, "I feel like he really didn't have another choice," and called the whole investigation rigged. And, just a all-around weird story. Troubled individual, obviously, and just kind of shocked to see that headline today, and a very surreal courtroom sketch of Ruth trying to stab himself in the jugular with a pen. Was unsuccessful at taking his own life today. Sentencing 3 weeks from today. So if you're following this story, and we'll be back with more of KVNU's For the People right after this look at the news with KVNU's Will Philwright.
Well, thank you, Jason. Utah lawmakers have introduced 5 proposed maps to redistrict the state's 4 congressional districts. Now, it's coming just days before a court-imposed deadline. The proposals are all an effort to try to comply with a recent ruling that found that the 2020 map had violated a voter-approved ballot initiative. Now, members of the Legislative Redistricting Committee met yesterday to discuss the proposed maps. The new proposals still split Salt Lake County into 4 districts, but keep Salt Lake City whole within 1 district. Now, the maps are also prohibited from being drawn to favor or disfavor any political party, incumbent, or candidate. Senator Scott Sandel, chair of the Legislative Redistricting Committee, said he anticipates the Utah lawmakers will meet in a special legislative session coming up in October to vote on a new map. Meanwhile, a second committee hearing is scheduled to be held tomorrow, followed by 10 days of open public comment. Well, a new Wallet Hub study has found that Utah graduates have the lowest student debt in the country. Now, the report compared student debt in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, with Utah ranking 51st for student loan indebtedness. Now, experts said that Utah also has the lowest proportion of students with debt. Now, the Kim C. Gardner Institute found that more than 300,000 Utahns hold some form of student loan debt. Now, the report also looked at other loan-related factors such as student work opportunities and unemployment rates. Now, overall, nationally, college loan balances stand at over $1.66 trillion, with an average of about $39,000 in debt for each borrower. And a rideshare driver has been charged with aggravated kidnapping and rape after allegedly refusing to take a woman home and instead driving her around for hours and sexually assaulting her. Alejandro Rendon Segovia, a 26-year-old Mexican national who lives in South Salt Lake, has been charged with multiple crimes. Now, according to court documents, in the early morning hours of August 30th, a family member had ordered a rideshare to take the victim home, and the app showed the victim arriving at her home at about 4:18. However, a doorbell camera at the residence did not capture the victim getting dropped off, and police later found the victim, who said that she never was dropped off and had to walk home. She told police that Segovia had sexually assaulted her. The victim's examination at a hospital also showed several bruises on her body and injuries consistent with sexual assault. Now, according to the documents, Segovia had drove the victim across Salt Lake Valley for hours before she was able to get out of the car and walk home. Now, Segovia has no known criminal history, but due to his work as a rideshare and a food delivery driver, officials believe there could be additional victims. Well, it's been a gorgeous afternoon as we've enjoyed lots of sunshine, and it's going to continue through the rest of the week. As overnight tonight, temperatures are going to drop into the mid to low 40s. Tomorrow we'll be back into the high 70s to low 80s, and it looks like we're going to stay in the low 80s through the rest of the week and into the weekend. And bringing you our weather here at the bottom of the hour is Logan Extermination that can help take care of the wasps and spiders around your home. Have your home's exterior sprayed to keep those pesky bugs out. It's Logan Extermination. Give them a call today at 752-8450. And I'm Will Feelright with your KVNU local headlines. Another check of news coming up at the top of the hour.
ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. At the UN General Assembly today, President Trump and Ukraine's president met on the sidelines for talks. The president expressed frustration to reporters with Russia's leader over continued attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure and civilians, along with Russian drones breaching NATO member airspace.
Do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Zelensky calling for tougher sanctions on Russia and says Russia is in economic trouble but still has a lot of money. A jury found Ryan Ruth guilty on all 5 counts today in the assassination attempt of Donald Trump last year at a Florida golf course. Ruth will be sentenced in December. Major League Baseball announcing it will officially use robot umpires to call balls and strikes as part of a challenge system for next season. It's known as the Automated Ball Strike System, or ABS, and is used to challenge accuracy of human umpire calls. This is ABC News.
Hey there, quick question. Wouldn't it be nice if your home stayed cool in the summer and warm in the winter without your HVAC working overtime? With Cardinal Spray Foam insulation, it can. They use an insulation that seals the gaps you didn't know you had, keeping air in, comfort up, and energy bills down. I guarantee you'll feel the difference. Plus, you could qualify for a $1,200 tax credit. Call 755-5012 or look them up online. Cardinal's Insulation, 755-5012.
Bringing Wall Street to Main Street. From your local experts in downtown Logan, this is the Adams Wealth Advisors Market Report.
Hi, this is Ty with Adams Wealth Advisors. Stocks posted modest losses on Tuesday following remarks from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who avoided signaling any direction on future interest rates. The decline in equities accelerated after he was asked about how much emphasis he and his colleagues place on market prices and whether they have a higher tolerance for higher values, a question that he responded with, "We do look at overall financial conditions, and we ask ourselves whether our policies are affecting financial conditions in a way that is what we're trying to achieve. But you're right, by many measures, for example, equity prices are fairly highly valued." The Dow Jones Industrial Average, an index composed of more defensive stocks, saw a mild drop of 89 points to 46,293. The Nasdaq retreated by 0.73% to 24,580, while the S&P 500 edged down by 0.55%. Sector performance reflected a flight to safety. The traditionally defensive sectors ended the day in positive territory. The energy sector outperformed all sectors, lifted by higher oil and natural gas prices. Consumer discretionary and technology sectors led the losses for the day, with all stocks in the so-called Magnificent Seven ending in the red. The bond market rallied for the first time in the past few days. The 5-year Treasury yield ticked down by 2 basis points to 3.67%, and the 10-year yield declined by 3 basis points to 4.11%. On the data front, S&P flash PMIs came in slightly above expectations but below prior readings, suggesting a slower pace of activity. Looking ahead, investors will watch new home sales data due tomorrow for additional insights into housing market conditions.
That's your update from Adams Wealth Advisors, guiding your financial future one day at a time. For personalized help planning yours, reach out to us at 435-752-1702. See you soon, Cache Valley. Advisory services offered through Adams Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor. For important disclosures and more information, visit adamswealthadvisors.com.
The Aggies are hitting the road and heading out to Nashville to take on Vanderbilt coming up this Saturday.
We're not conceding to anybody, and we're just going to keep chipping and working and becoming. And whoever we play next, then here we go.
I'm J.D. Walker with KVNU Aggie Game Day, kicking off at 9 a.m. this Saturday as our Aggies head out east to take on Vanderbilt. We'll have all the action right here on 102.1 FM, 610 AM, KVNU.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Talked about the redistricting, the first meeting in what's going to be a week-long series of meetings with potential maps on Friday, although I think that's probably too optimistic, of the Legislative Redistricting Committee beginning this work. They've hired Real Clear Politics' Sean Trende as a consultant, and we played that audio of some of their discussion yesterday. If you want to hear the whole thing, again, you can find it at le.utah.gov. Just click on yesterday's date, and that was really the only thing going on Capitol Hill, so it's pretty easy to find there to see the video and audio. This was court-ordered, and it is a really interesting thing I've been following because it's really an issue of questions of legislative authority, allegations from some lawmakers of judicial overreach, and in the end, a question of what redistricting is supposed to be about, fair representation for residents of the state of Utah. And so it's important. And I think, too, it's one that doesn't, it's not a super sexy issue, right? It doesn't get a lot of attention. It doesn't, people don't pause when they hear, we're going to be talking about redistricting. But it's really important. And so I hope everybody does follow along and as much as you can handle. Sutherland Institute each week allows our listeners to get a little sneak preview of their Defending Ideas show. They put out a new episode each week. You can watch the episodes on their on their website, sutherlandinstitute.org. And as a conservative think tank in Salt Lake, this is part of their goal of just getting people plugged in and talking about the legislature, about public policy here in Utah and more. And of course, they have an agenda. They'd like to influence legislation regularly. That's why they exist. But this Defending Ideas show is meant just to get you talking, whether you agree with what you hear or not. Our listeners get a sneak preview of this each week. We have a special guest coming up at 5:10 from Utah State University to talk about 16 years of Science Unwrapped and how they're celebrating it. Marianne Mufaletta will be with us. So we're getting to this a little early today, but I wanted to make sure everybody got a chance, and I also want to make sure everyone feels free to weigh in, because this is going to make you think and probably spark some opinions. So first off, 753-5868. If you'd like to react to this week's discussion, Nick Dunn and Bill Duncan of the Sutherland Institute talking redistricting. What happened yesterday? How did we get to here? And where do we go next? And what are some of the broader questions at stake here? It's this week's sneak preview of Sutherland Institute's Defending Ideas.
Around the country about big fights over redistricting. There was, of course, a lot of attention in Texas because of debates about redistricting in the Texas legislature. And then California, the governor there was saying, well, maybe we'll get into it too, and other states. And so there's been this big national fight, and it's very political, over redistricting in advance of the midterms. And we've also been debating it here in Utah, but a little bit differently. So I want to ask you, in the context of everything that's going on, what is the big fight over or connected to the redistricting issue in Utah right now?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting how it is. We are in the same dealing with the same issue of redistricting, but the approach is quite different. In fact, there's kind of a funny to my mind at least. Maybe this shows kind of humor that makes sense to me, but that what's happening is that Utah is adopting or a better way to say this is some people in Utah would like us to adopt the system that California is now trying to get away from, in order to create, to go back to gerrymandering, which was the process before. But let me try and describe, I guess, basically what's happening in Utah as it relates to redistricting and gerrymandering for that matter. So a number of years ago, citizens groups were concerned that the legislature was not responsive to them in terms of they felt that the legislature was too political as they were creating the legislative districts. The challenge that they have, of course, is that the Utah Constitution specifically says that the boundaries of electoral districts in Utah are to be established by the legislature. But they thought that they could get around that by proposing a ballot initiative. It's sort of created by voters, and if it gets enough signatures, it goes on the ballot, and that becomes a law, just like any other law that the legislature passed. And the particular law creates a commission that has to give some proposed boundaries for electoral districts to the legislature, and the legislature decides what to do with those. And they have to decide what to do with those, again, because of that constitutional language, because the requirement that the legislature is the one who has to ultimately take responsibility for creating the districts in this state. And the legislature, so the commission comes up with a proposal. The legislature doesn't approve any of those and creates their own boundaries. The question then goes through the courts up to the Utah Supreme Court in summer of 2024. And in 2024, the Utah Supreme Court holds kind of a really striking, almost shocking ruling that regardless of what the Constitution says about the relative power of the legislature and citizens and all of that, that the courts themselves have to determine what the unwritten intent of voters was, and to make sure that becomes the law. Well, what does that mean in practice? In this case, it means that the courts are going to have to decide. Voters, when they went to the polls and they approved this process, and they created a statute like any other statute, it becomes kind of a super statute because the legislature can't really change it unless the courts now approve the changes and say, oh, that's what we think that voters would have wanted. there's all kinds of problems with that. I'm sure we'll get to talk about that as we go along. But that's what set up a very recent ruling from a lower court. So this is a district court, a trial judge in Utah, who said, well, the legislature in what they proposed, they didn't get close enough to what we think the voters would have wanted, and so the order goes to the legislature to create a new set of boundaries and give that to the court for the court to determine whether that's an appropriate boundary or not. And I hope just by describing that and obviously I feel I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I think in trying to describe that, I think you can see some potential problems. Like, really, are the courts really the ones to do that? Does our constitutional system really allow courts to superintend the process? Why, if the citizens are just creating a statute like any other statute, can't the legislature, amend that or appeal it just like they would a law that's passed by, in kind of the more normal format? So those are the kind of situations that have risen, and that makes our situation quite different from Texas or California, where the aim is kind of more partisan. What we want in those states, I think, the proponents are saying, we want maps that get a result of plus D or plus R. And in Utah, the question is, what is the court's role? What is the legislature's role? How do people govern themselves? Can we keep that? Basically, all of those kinds of questions.
So essentially, the debate in Utah is who gets to draw the maps and how do they draw them, right?
Right. And on redistricting, that's the key question. There's an underlying question, of course, and that is, what does the Constitution mean and who gets to determine that, which is an even more important question. But you're right. That's kind of the bottom line for this specific controversy.
So, Bill, I want to ask you about this kind of deeper constitutional debate you kind of alluded to, that, again, just as a casual observer, it seems like the core issue is not really debate over what the district maps or the legislative maps look like. It's who draws them, how do they get to draw them, kind of who decides. But this is, again, a deeper question between, you mentioned this idea of sort of super statutes passed by ballot initiative versus, regular laws passed by the legislature. Right. Can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. The thing that I think is sometimes difficult to understand in our system is we typically think about the way things are done in the U.S. government. We think of three branches of government, and that's still the case. That's true in Utah, but there's a slight variation with these ballot initiatives where the people themselves can create their own law, at least initiate their own laws. But what I think many people don't realize is that power is contained in the state constitution in the same article that describes the legislative power, and it says the legislative power has to be shared between the legislature and, in some specific ways that are laid out in the Constitution, the people themselves. So they can directly make laws, like we're used to more from California, and a lot of Western states have that kind of approach. What's interesting is that this debate is always kind of, I think, skips over that reality of we have to understand where the nature of this authority comes from in our Constitution. And what does the Constitution itself say? And the Constitution says the legislature has the legislative power, and the people also have the legislative power in the way described in this Constitution. And those ways are, they can either initiate a law if they don't like what the legislature is doing. They can always say, well, we think we got a better idea. We'll take it straight to the voters, and the voters can approve that. Then it becomes a law, just like what the legislature passes. Or they can do a referendum if the legislature passes a law that most people don't like.
Again, this is just a sneak preview of this week's Sutherland Institute Defending Ideas episode. You can watch the whole thing this afternoon at sutherlandinstitute.org. But that is the short and sweet of it. Nailed it, Bill and Nick. Those are the questions at stake here, and it really is a question of, the courts have said the legislature ignored the will of the voters by ignoring Prop 4, the Better Boundaries Initiative passed in 2018, and that created an independent redistricting process that drew maps that the lawmakers then just ignored and drew their own. And the court said you can't do that. But it is this interesting question of the the power of the legislature elected to represent us, enumerated in the state constitution. But again, there is also this power reserved for the citizens to do so themselves via ballot initiative. And when the two butt up against each other, who should win? Well, the courts have said the people win. And some lawmakers are not happy about that. What do you think? Who should win in that scenario? 753-5868. We'll be back right after this.
Hi, this is Keystone Cabinets. We're truly honored to be named a Best of Northern Utah Gold winner for the Cabinet Shop category.
We're so excited. Thank you for your votes, your support, and for letting us do what we love.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. It is critical we keep AM radio in all cars and all trucks. Text AM to 52886 today.
Standard message and data rates apply.
CashValleyDaily.com, your go-to source for all things local. Catch the adrenaline of live local sports and the latest news involving the Utah State Aggies. But that's not all. Get plugged into the pulse of your community with our comprehensive local news coverage. From city council decisions to feature stories highlighting people in your own neighborhood, we've got you covered. Don't miss out on crucial information that affects you and your loved ones on CashValleyDaily.com. Stay informed, engaged, and empowered, because staying local means staying connected.
The Above and Beyond Salute.
Hello.
Yeah, good morning. Is Jordan Hansen there?
This is him.
Someone reached out to us anonymously and told us how you work as a counselor at Pioneer Elementary. Is that right?
That's right.
And I guess on top of that, you also coach baseball and have done so for years and worked with youth camps.
I just like working with kids and helping them find their passion and helping them develop their skills.
The Above and Beyond Salute, sponsored by Firehouse Subs on News Talk KVNU.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Brett called during the break, couldn't stay because he's at work and says he shouldn't even be listening. Thanks, Brett, for risking your job to listen to the show, though. We appreciate it. But Brett called and said, in this scenario, as kind of laid out in the Sutherland Institute Defending Ideas sneak preview there, this specific situation regards gerrymandering, redistricting, the courts saying you can't ignore the will of the voters via ballot initiative and all of that. But the question kind of set up by Nick and Bill of Sutherland Institute in this week's episode is, who wins when, you've got constitutional powers spelled out clearly for the legislature, but also for citizens to craft law through their own ballot initiative process. And when the two butt heads, who wins? The courts say the people. Brett said absolutely the people should win because it is, as you've said on the show, hard to get a ballot initiative passed. Yeah, I do kind of feel that way, but I have reservations. Direct democracy, which is not what we have here in Utah, but the idea of direct democracy is nice. That, the people, doing their own legislating and voting on every bill and all of that. It's a wonderful concept. It's messy, and public opinion changes depending on the latest episode of whatever TV show we're watching. Let's admit it. Oregon, for example, has a very low threshold for ballot initiatives. Basically, it's something like 11% of the last total vote in the gubernatorial election. So that meant 11,000 signatures was all they needed to get a ballot initiative passed in Oregon. That's ridiculous. It should never be that easy. It's hard here in Utah, and I like that. And so I'm with you, Brett. Yeah, the people should win. If lawmakers disagree with the ballot initiative, they should maybe just have to suck it up because it's hard to get a ballot initiative passed. But we should be careful about direct democracy. There's a reason the representative democratic systems and legislatures work, and that's because it's slower and less prone to sometimes less prone to the latest trends. Our lawmakers do get caught up in them, I guess. I don't know. I can't decide. We'll be back with hour 2 of today's show right after